Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an incredible story like this one. I enrolled in a night photography workshop. I set appointments with therapists. I reclaimed my body with the slow, steady effort of small choices. More sleep, salads, walks. The quietest revenge of all is to become someone they no longer recognize but need. After the separation filed gently, with no public spectacle, David found his afternoons long and empty. His lover was now his conversation partner and his liability. Claire had the awkwardness of someone living inside a borrowed life. They had each other, yes, but they had forfeited the scaffolding that makes an affair feel romantic. Secrecy that thrills and the eventual return to the larger life, like a thief moving home after a successful heist. In place of drama, I let the absence of spectacle do its work. They had to live with each other in the rooms we once shared. You can't rehearse intimacy without consequences, and their rehearsals grew less convincing with each passing day. There were moments when the moral universe seemed almost to correct itself. Mark, returning from a business trip, found something out of place in the guest room. Pair of cufflinks that did not belong to him. He asked about them. David shrugged. The tiny details, those accidental collisions, stacked up. The son I loved, strong, stubborn, incandescent, was not someone I wanted to injure with a dramatic reveal. So I let the facts sit like stones in a riverbed. Time erodes illusions. He found out eventually. Not because I orchestrated a dramatic reveal, but because the house of cards their secret sat on was always flimsy and fragile. A misplaced message, a late-night call, a calendar invite. Inevitably, Mark saw something that unpeeled his certainty. The reaction was a private thing. No confrontation in the living room, no scene in the driveway. He sat on his bed, palms over his face, and let the world shrink. He did not call Claire or David that night. He did not scream. He woke at dawn with the noise of grief heavy in his chest, and sent them each one. Short message. We need to talk. I watched from a distance. I had fashioned a life of quiet observation. Now I let events unfold in the way they inherently do. There was no triumphant music. There was only a slow, inevitable recalibration. Conversations that turned into accusations. Apologies that tasted like demand and fell flat. The dull sense of ordinary things crumbling. In the end, my revenge was very small and very clean. I did not throw things. I did not post proofs on social media. I did not orchestrate a public exposure. I signed the papers necessary to protect my future, and then I left the house full-time. Not as a dramatist, but as a woman who had decided she would not wake up every morning next to a man who had betrayed her trust. I took the pottery pieces that had my fingerprints in the clay, the signed prints of a friend's photographs, the small things that are themselves a kind of life. Once, at a gallery opening the following spring, a woman I used to know brushed past me and said, with a look of puzzled sympathy, "I'm so sorry about everything." She expected me to sag, to strike an impossible pose of heartbreak. Instead, I smiled, small, steady, and introduced her to the woman standing beside me, the artist whose workshop I had been attending. We talked about glazes and light, and the way clay changes when it learns the warmth of fingers. People talked about my resilience, as if resilience were a tidy word that fits in columns. But what I felt was simpler. Relief. David sank into a quieter, smaller life. I heard intermittently about his efforts to rebuild, about the dinners he prepared alone, the way he called Mark and stuttered through sentences. Claire, whom everyone had once admired for her propriety, found the world less kind. She had lost the scaffolding that had raised her into our lives. They remained together for a while, bound perhaps by the same guilt that had formed their affair. The magnetic particle that draws two wrong things together. It was a private arrangement, not mine to judge, and it disintegrated slowly. Like a letter left by the sea dot, the thing about quiet revenge is that it leaves the storyteller in possession of her dignity. It does not require spectacle. It requires endurance. I had prepared for myself a life where I could sleep. I had arranged my finances, my friends, my mornings. I had placed 1,000 small good things around me like soft gates. And when Mark called, years later, finally willing to accept the shape of the past without the sharpness, he said, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I said nothing for a long time, because silence, when given freely, is mercy. I forgive you," I said at last, "because I meant it. Revenge, I had discovered, yields less solace than a life lived again." On a late summer evening, I walked along a riverbank I had discovered when I had first left the house for a motel. The same milk truck hummed by in the distance. The city breathed its ordinary sigh. In my pocket was a small note from the gallery owner. My pottery had been well received. In my hand, the cool ceramic cup I had made lopsided, imperfect, felt like a promise I had kept. I had not broken anyone publicly. I had not made a spectacle. I had, in the way of women who have been invisible for too long, made my life visible again. Their secret remained theirs to carry. That, too, was a kind of punishment, to be left with a choice they had already made. I never gleefully watched them fall. Watching people pick up the pieces of the lives they have cracked themselves open is hardly a sport. I watched, instead, the steady coming together of my own life-new friends. A classmate who laughed too loudly at my pottery jokes. Mornings that felt like new pages rather than stains. The world often mistakes noise for justice. I learned that peace is quieter. It doesn't come from revenge's pyrotechnics, but from the reassembly of small, faithful things. The pottery wheel's steady spin. The book's quiet page. The neighbor's call that says nothing but arrives just when it must. I had not ruined anyone with a flourish, but I had reclaimed the only thing that really mattered, myself. When people asked me later how I had survived, I told them what had kept me: attention to small, ordinary acts that build a life. I did not tell them about the countless nights I let sorrow walk through me like a ghost. I did not tell them about the folder of proof tucked away in a drawer, a file only I had opened. I did not need to. The story of my revenge was not a spectacle. It was a slow, loving architecture of renewal. If you ask me now whether I regretted not yelling in the kitchen, not making the scandalous call, not burning photographs on the lawn, all the melodrama that movies promise, I would say no. My revenge was quieter. It was not about hurting them in a way that satisfied the crowd. It was about living in a way that made me unrecognizable to those who had chosen betrayal. It was about making small, persistent investments in my future until that future could stand on its own 2 feet. On the edge of the river, with dusk folding the world into a soft blue, I turned my face up to the sky and let the evening cool the line of my jaw. The secret they had once believed could bind them no longer had any hold on me. I kept my folder of evidence like a talisman I never needed to show. Somewhere deep inside me, the quieter form of revenge had finished its work. I had become someone who could not be diminished by the things other people chose to do. That was the only victory I wanted. I let the river carry the small things I did not need. The rest my hands, my work, my mornings stayed. They lived with their secret. I lived beyond it. In the end, silence and persistence taught me more than any dramatic revelation could. And that, I thought as stars pricked themselves into evening, was enough. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd feel invisible in her own home. But that's exactly how I felt the afternoon. I stumbled onto a secret. I wasn't meant to see the sort of secret that makes the world rearrange itself while you're still trying to. Breathe. David had always had that gentle, practiced charm. The way his smile softened when he crossed a room, The easy jokes. The way he could talk to anyone like they were the last thing he'd been waiting to encounter that day. We'd built a life together. A slow, steady architecture of routines and shared bills and the quiet ceremony of long-term partnership. Our son Mark was 28 when he got engaged to Claire. A neat, careful woman with an ineffable polish. Claire fit into our family the way a well-cut glove fits a hand, seamless, right at first touch. Everyone approved. Everyone smiled. I found the first clue by accident. I was in the study combing through envelopes, old cards, receipts, a birthday banner I'd saved from years ago, looking for a card for Mark's birthday. The study door was ajar. David's phone lay face up on the desk, a blue glow sending small shadows across the leather blotter. I had no business picking it up. Still, when it buzzed, I moved closer, small, thoughtless, like breathing. The message preview reads simply, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Alone." From Claire's number. My first rationalizations were a constellation of desperate things. Wrong chat, mistaken identity, a spam message that copied a familiar name. I put the phone back and walked away, telling myself I had invented it. But patterns have a way of gathering like winter coalescing from small chills, and little things started to make sense in ways they hadn't before. David had begun coming home late with excuses that smelled faintly of perfume. Claire started appearing at family events with an odd backward glance at him, a micro-expression of something like calculation. There were receipts, coffee shops, token bouquets misplaced, and small, like breadcrumbs. I followed them once, not to spy in the sensuous thrill of cheating way that magazines romanticize, but because my own memory needed the anchor of sight. If I saw nothing, I could sleep. If I saw something, I could plan. They met at a cafe off Main, one that kept late hours and had half a dozen small tables under a canopy of plants. I sat at a table with a paper and pretended to read while watching the pair cross the street. When they sat, they leaned toward each other, words folded in low arcs. Their hands touched, briefly, under the table. Claire laughed at something David said, then tucked a stray hair behind her ear with a gesture that looked practiced. That look so intimate and careful landed in me like an accusation. I didn't confront them. Confrontation makes too much noise. I wanted quiet, precise things. For weeks I occupied myself with the craft of observation. I learned the timing of their texts, early morning, late night, the 2-hour gaps when we were supposed to be sleeping. How Claire's handwriting softened when she addressed David in private notes. How his tie smelled like a different cologne after their rendezvous. I committed details to memory like armor. I learned the way guilt mutters to itself in micro-expressions. A half-turn of the mouth, the pause before a sentence. The first night I decided to act, I recorded nothing and made no dramatic entry. I packed a small bag. I left a single folded note on the kitchen island for David. "I'm leaving for a while. Think about who you want to be when I come back." I did not write accusations. I did not scream. I waited until dawn, put the bag in the trunk, and drove to a motel 3 towns away. The world outside my window was ordinary. A milk truck hummed. A jogger panted past a storefront. I wanted my absence to be a question mark. Being away was a peculiar kind of revenge, because I asked nothing of them but contemplation. It let the discovery of my absence do its work slowly in the rooms they'd shared. I returned home 2 days later. The house felt smaller. David came to the door like a man who had rehearsed every greeting and found each one inadequate. He hugged me in the way strangers do, hands unsure, voice hushed. "I thought," he began, but I cut him off. "Don't," I said quietly. "Just don't." His shoulders slumped. He did not know whether to plead or to steady himself. When a house is a theater for lies, the actors keep finding new ways to warm the stage. I could have called for arguments, for uproar. I could have told Mark and watched the family geometry collapse in spectacular colors. I could have called Claire and demanded explanations. I chose instead to tighten the web of evidence in a way that later would make it impossible to interpret away. I made copies. I photographed screenshots of text, small things. Nothing that looked like theatrical evidence, just a trail of lines that, when read straight through, described the betrayal. I tucked printed receipts into envelopes. I assembled a folder with the quiet thoroughness of someone making a will. Each paper felt like a stone I could drop into the still water of our life and watch the ripples. I used the folder not as a weapon, but as a mirror. I refused to let them know I had collected these things. I won't pretend gathering evidence didn't make me feel complicated, vindicated, and small, terrible and terribly human. But there is a kind of power in knowing. It steadies the hands. I didn't stop living. I began to put small changes into motion, deliberate, not dramatic. I returned to the pottery class I had loved years ago and let my hands relearn the shape of clay on the wheel. I called friends I had neglected. I walked the dog by a long river at dawn and watched the sun flatten gold across the water. My quiet revenge would not be a scene. It would be a life rebuilt dot, and yet sometimes the smallest gestures hurt the most. I would walk into the kitchen and find a lipstick mark on a mug. I would set a plate without saying anything and feel the space between us widen like a tide. I learned to savor small private pleasures in the face of cold betrayal. A book read cover to cover in one sitting, a friend's laughter into the small hours. These were not spiteful. They were reclamation. The real work of quiet revenge, I discovered, is not in orchestrating their downfall, but in unspectacular persistence. People who cheat rely on the ability of normal life to cover their tracks. You peel that away quietly, brick by brick. One Monday morning, without fanfare, I called our financial planner and scheduled a meeting. Nothing theatrical, just a conversation about portfolios and signatures, and the little house accounts where our lives pooled. I insisted on transparency. I made appointments to meet with our attorney. I asked questions that were not accusatory but precise. What happens in a separation? What's the process for dividing accounts? There was a moral clarity in paperwork that felt almost like prayer. It put my life into black and white after weeks of grey. I watched David the way one watches a weather system, predicting storms I couldn't stop. Without confronting him, I made small logistical decisions that left him scrambling. I moved important documents into a safe deposit box and changed the contact email for joint accounts to one he could not access. When he later tried to blame confusion, the ledger did not agree with him. There was no shouting, no scenes. There was only the slow, unavoidable arithmetic of consequence. On a wet evening in late January, when the window panes gathered beads of rain and the house smelled of lemon oil, Claire stopped by. She said she wanted to talk things through with me. There was a softness in her approach, a contrition I did not wish to invite. She smiled with the practiced politeness of a woman who always had her answers prepared. I offered her tea. We sat at the kitchen table as if we were equals sharing a cookbook. Her hair fell across her face. She spoke of Mark, of his need to travel, of wedding plans she had filled with spreadsheets. She spoke of details. Those details were a kind of pleading in their own language. I listened. I asked small neutral questions. Each of her answers came out as if she were practicing them aloud, polishing them smooth. "You've been home less," she volunteered at one point. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," I said, and it was a true sentence in the same way that a closed fist is a true shape. "How are you feeling about the wedding?" "Oh, we're excited," she said. "Nervous, of course." I let that float for a moment. Then I asked, casually, "Do you feel torn sometimes? Between the life you want and other things?" The question was a soft knife. She looked at me like I had asked whether it had snowed last winter. "What do you mean?" she said. "Nothing," I said. but my voice carried an evenness that made her discomfort bloom. She argued the normalcy of their conversations, the pure affection she purportedly felt for Mark. She avoided specifics about afternoons and a certain cafe, about a cologne he sometimes wore that smelled like cedar and something like regret. She was careful not to lie outright. Instead, she moved through the space as if we were discussing the weather. She left with a hug that felt like a contract signed in good faith. She pressed her cheek against mine and whispered, "I'm so sorry," which was the most useless phrase, simultaneously a confession and a shield. I let her go. I did not tell Mark. The knowledge we keep for ourselves is its own currency. Revenge does not always need witnesses. Sometimes it requires restraint. Instead, I made decisions that ensured my future could exist independently of them. I contacted an old friend who ran a small gallery and asked if I might show a piece of pottery at a spring exhibit. He said yes,